iron fence, a trio of Young's business partners, Paul Castle, Robbie Cursis, Johan Ilishov, all in apparent suicides, people jumping onto tubes and things like that. And, of course, the Litvinenko poisoning that we saw about 10 years ago. So it does seem that there is, should we say, a link between those that have crossed the Russian regime and their strange, mysterious deaths, either in shootings, hangings, apparent suicides, or indeed in poisonings. And as you would expect, the British government have, of course, been responding to this. This was Boris Johnson speaking yesterday.
While it would be wrong to prejudge the investigation, I can reassure the House that should evidence emerge that implies state responsibility, then Her Majesty's government will respond appropriately and robustly.
Well, that was Boris, and today Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, has been using some pretty strong words. Here she is.
The use of a nerve agent on UK soil is a brazen and reckless act. This was attempted murder in the most cruel and public way. People are right to want to know who to hold to account. But if we are to be rigorous in this investigation, we must avoid speculation and allow the police to carry on their investigation. We are committed to doing all we can to bring the perpetrators to justice, whoever they are and wherever they may be.
So there's two of our leading politicians saying we will do something, particularly if this can be proven. Now, in response to this, what have the Russian embassy said? They've said that they've accused the media of launching a new phase of the anti-Russia campaign that has been ongoing in the United Kingdom. They say we are unimpressed by the statement of the Foreign Secretary in Parliament today. So they're saying don't rush to judgment. So I wonder what you think about all of this and what perhaps should be done. You know, if we ascertain that in some way this former Russian agent was poisoned by people with links to the Russian regime, what should the Home Secretary do? What do you think the response should be? Come on, give me your suggestions. Tell me, if it does turn out to be the Russians, what should Amber Rudd do next? And you can let me know on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps you think, do you know what? The government will huff and puff and actually they will do nothing, in which case you can text to 84850. And maybe you think the Russian embassy are right. Is this all some huge smear campaign against Putin and the Russians? If you think that, then tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook. We're live here, and I'm in Florida today, a long way from that horrible snow of London last week. I'm in Fort Myers, and it's really rather a nice place to be. I'm just sort of rather struck that when you hear Boris suggesting, oh, well, maybe, well, we won't not send the football team to the World Cup in Russia, but maybe a few of our diplomats won't go. Well, wow, that's hardly going to, make Putin very scared. And yes, you could say that the Home Secretary spoke in a tough way today, but what is she actually going to do? I wonder, are the British cabinet, are they behaving a little bit like King Lear from that Shakespeare play? I will have such revenges on you both that all the world shall. I will do such things. What they are, I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth. You think I'll weep? No, I'll not weep. I'll get revenge on you both. That will make the whole world. I will do such things. I don't know what I'll do exactly, but it'll be devastating. You expect me to cry? Well, I won't. Is it all? And Boris would appreciate that, of course, being a great classicist and lover of Shakespeare and everything else. What are we actually going to do? Now, my guess is, if this does turn out to be directly linked to the Putin regime, my guess is we'll expel a few more diplomats. My guess is there'll be talk, perhaps, of further sanctions against Russia. And by the way, folks, for those of you that have heard the news over the last few years, and, you can listen to Nick Clegg, or you can read The Guardian, or you can hear quite a lot of Democratic politicians here in America, the story that Vladimir Putin is one of my best friends and that I'm a regular visitor to Moscow is complete and utter hogwash. I've never met Vladimir Putin. I am not part of some international global conspiracy. I did say back in 2013 and 14 that I thought he was a very effective political operator, but I also said that I wouldn't particularly want to live in Russia, a country in which journalists go missing, a country in which free speech doesn't really kind of happen, and you could say, couldn't you, a country in which if you do cross Vladimir Putin, you seem to come to a pretty sticky end. So what should be done if this link is proven? I'm going to ask Richard, who's calling from Banstead and is a new caller to the show. Richard, what should we do?
Hey, well, I don't know about what we should do, but I'm thinking about it and looking at all, what's gone on with this nerve gas and who he was and the fact that he was swapped with several other spies, I believe, something like that.
Yes.
And how public it was and out in the open it is. I've never heard anyone mention the fact that there's a possibility that maybe someone else did it just to make Russia look bad. Is that a possibility?
Well, no, of course it's a possibility. And yes, you're right. He was
point at them, aren't they? Instantly. So.
Well, it's certainly true, Richard, that it suits much of the West at the moment to have Russia and to have Putin as the bogeyman. They need to have an enemy, so blame Putin for everything. I mean, I kept hearing in the referendum, if you vote leave, the only person that'll be pleased is Vladimir Putin. So he is up there as the big enemy. I mean, this guy, you're right, he was swapped. There was a spy called Anna Chapman, and that was the swap.
That's right.
But equally, Richard, with what evidence we have, and I accept it's somewhat limited, but with what evidence we have, we do know that Putin and others in the Russian regime had said bad things about him and did not approve at all of the way in which he'd behaved, just by the way as we would not approve of anybody that worked for us defecting to what they saw as a foreign power.
I mean, they could have made it more pointing towards them if they'd left a Russian flag on the bench with him. I mean, it's so great, isn't it? I know they can't. Yeah. There's no proof and evidence and all the rest of it, but it just seems like it's as if someone else has tucked them up. I mean, I've never heard anyone mention that. It just seems a bit odd that it's so obvious but unprovable. It just strikes me as strange. I mean, the guy.
Can you think? I mean,
for what, 8 years? 8 years he was free from them.
Yeah. No, Richard, I listen. I understand the point you're making. All I'm wondering is, in whose interests would it be to frame the Russians?
Well, yeah, there you go. Exactly.
That's the hard bit, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the. But look,
totally.
But the Russian embassy. The Russian embassy, Richard, just to sort of reiterate the point, they are making it clear that they see this all as anti-Russian hysteria and, of course, deny any knowledge or any involvement. Richard, I thank you. So Richard saying maybe the whole thing is a deliberate attempt to stitch up the Russians. In whose interest would that be? I asked. Well, I suppose you could say much of the Western establishment who want us, it seems to me, to have a new Cold War with Russia. And I'm saying that. Please don't scream at the radio. Don't say Farage is a Putin fan. I'm not. I have generally thought, though, that better relations with Russia would be a better thing than worse relations. Roy is calling from Stratford. Hello, Roy.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. We should try and get better relations with Mr. Putin. He's probably not a nice guy to cross. But to me, as I understand it, this man, he was a prisoner in a Russian prison. So if they kill him, why not kill him there? Why release him? And, I was probably like you, I was listening to our Home Secretary this morning being interviewed about this, and it was just all talk, all bluster. There is absolutely nothing we can or will do. We won't stand up to the Russians. We're not capable. And Mr. Putin, he's probably laughing at this and laughing at our politicians. This is how bad we've become.
But Roy, on the other hand, I mean, it isn't very seemly, is it, to have people being murdered on our streets and in little restaurants in Salisbury in Wiltshire. I mean, the government have got to say something, haven't they?
Yeah, but the thing is, Nigel, do we really know for sure that it is Mr. Putin, that the Russians are responsible? How about some of the other countries of the former Soviet Empire? We don't know. And the trouble is now, Nigel, is that trust within our own politicians has broken down so much that, for me personally, if a politician says something, naturally I just assume now that they're lying.
Has it got that bad, Roy?
Nigel, I just don't vote anymore. I don't believe any politician, although I have voted UKIP in the past. I think now the main parties, they're not interested in the average person. They routinely lie for themselves, but I just don't trust them. And there's nothing we can do about it.
So you're saying, basically, Roy, you're saying, firstly, our politicians won't do a blooming thing anyway, and secondly, you're really saying we should wait for there to be real evidence, yeah?
Well, for real evidence, and also, for my main point, what can we do? You remember when Russian forces invaded Crimea? Sanctions didn't mean a thing. They're still there, war's still going on. There's nothing we can do. And, and let's be, as well as Bismarck, real politics, let's get real on this. What can we do? Nothing.
Not a lot, Roy, I would have thought, and yet to listen to Boris Johnson and Amber Rudd, the reason I used King Lear, it all sounded very strong, but I think in reality it doesn't really add up to a row of beans. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC, live from Fort Myers in Florida. It's now 7:15.
Nick Farage.
So we've seen it before, and we've seen it in Salisbury in Wiltshire, as Sergei and Yulia Skripal are very, very seriously hurt by poison, and one of the police officers who was first on the scene has been taken very seriously ill, though he's not critical. The agent, Amber Rudd, didn't tell us what it was, but the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down, which, funny enough, is only about 3 miles from Salisbury, and they're world-renowned experts in this, and they are testing this, but the Home Secretary says that it is a nerve agent. And I'm asking you, given the strong words from Boris and in particular from Amber Rudd, what do you think the Home Secretary will do if this link is proved to be Russian, or is the whole thing one great big gigantic setup? Messages pouring in. Skripal was released by Putin in exchange for Russian spies. The US government, the UK government, can freeze and seize assets of Putin's friends, the kleptocrats and oligarchs in the UK. Still, shameless Putin sympathiser Nigel_Farage on LBC supports the Russian embassy point of view. It is all Russian hysteria. I don't know who you are sending this message in, saying that I'm supporting the Russian embassy point of view and that I'm a shameless Putin sympathiser. I'm neither of them. I actually haven't given you an opinion yet, have I? I've actually played all ends against the middle because I want to find out what you've got to say on it. So try as hard as you like. Sorry, it doesn't work. Ian is calling from Woodford. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening. Yeah, well, I'm supporting...
So are you sceptical, Ian, about this or not?
Well, I was just about to say I'm very much in favour of what the Russian embassy have said, and I don't.
Are you?
It doesn't really ring true that somebody who's been released in a spy swap years later. We're asked to believe the Russian Secret Service have attacked him or attempted to murder him in this way. There has to be another reason, something that's happened since then. I would suggest. I can't believe it's to do with a spy swap of 8 years ago or whatever. And all this sort of talk about the Crimea. Somebody was talking about the Crimea. People don't seem to. It doesn't seem to register. We don't hear this talk about democracy. When it's something like 98% of the people in the Crimea want to be Russian and want to be governed by the Russian government. Nobody seems to care about that all of a sudden.
Well, I mean, Ian, I don't think the Crimea would have happened for one moment had it not been for the European Union and NATO looking to extend eastwards and to take Ukraine into both of those organisations, which was a direct threat, is the way I think that the Russians saw this. And I always said, Ian, that if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when you get a bit of a reaction. Now, I know some of you will think, aha, there's the proof. He's a Putin supporter. But that, Ian, is what I believe happened.
Well, but I think you're 100% right. There's no doubt about it that some years ago, Putin curtailed the power of the Jewish oligarchs in Russia. And I remember at the time, the American government made a statement saying, we're not putting up with this. Putin arrested a few of them who tried to start their own TV station and the usual sort of things that go on, take control of the gas supplies in Russia. And ever since then, Putin has been the number one enemy of the media. And this is what it all comes down to, whether people like to hear it or not.
Ian, no, listen, it's a very interesting point of view. Thank you, and you made it very, very well indeed, too. Nigel, please wait for the evidence. So far, this is only speculation. Do you honestly think Putin would authorise this? Oligarchs who want to return to Russia are equally suspect. It's all speculation, says Richard from Cheltenham. Nigel, to accuse Russia is too obvious. So here we go. I've got some of you thinking I'm accusing Russia, and some of you who think I'm an apologist for Russia. Nigel, to accuse Russia is too obvious. The USA desperately want a new Cold War with Russia, and in doing so, they have the European Union and the UK's support, as they want to build missile bases in the Ukraine with missiles pointed at Russia and China. The poison used was state level, and that's the difference, says D. So D suggesting that actually this agent that was used, you know, is not something ordinary criminals could get their hands on. D, the fact that it's state level doesn't necessarily prove that it's the Russian state, I suppose, is the answer to that. Why have a murder so visible and this method, says Mike in Eltham. So it's really interesting. So far, I'm getting quite a lot of scepticism through your texts, through your tweets, and through your phone calls. And so far on this show, a feeling that we shouldn't act prematurely until we know the facts. A regular caller to this show is John in Formby. Good evening, John.
Yes, good evening, Nigel.
Well,
first of all, you quoted the Bard. I'm going to quote Oscar Wilde.
Right.
One enemy, Mr. Putin, may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose 8 looks like deliberate.
Right. So, well, that either means then, John, that Putin is almost psychopathic about this and doesn't care what the world thinks, or it means there is some sort of very strange stitch-up going on. Which is it?
Well, we don't really know. I mean, if I was a bookie, I'd be giving the shortest odds on it being Poison Ivan, as I call him nowadays. It could be that it was an overzealous KGB man who did this, thinking that Putin would approve, a bit like the Knights and Thomas à Becket.
Yeah.
And Henry II.
Gosh, we really are doing our history tonight, John, aren't we?
Oh, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
They don't teach it properly nowadabe like they did in our vintage.
You're probably right.
That's a conversation for another time. But I think that it will probably be proved that this is Putin. And
okay.
You've got to consider other things. Russian naval activity in the Channel and the Murray Firth. Probing flights, things like that. He's a pretty dangerous customer. And one thought
yes, he may well be, John. But John, if just getting back to where we started this show, if that link is proved, what then either will or should Amber Rudd and Boris Johnson do?
Well, I'm not convinced they'll do anything. They'll blow off a lot of hot steam. Quoting Oscar Wilde again, the play I was quoting, I think, was the importance of being earnest, and I think this will turn out to be the impotence of being earnest. They seem to be able to do this with impunity. You and I think, are both old enough to remember Georgy Markov.
Yep, absolutely. This was the umbrella, wasn't it? Just explain to people, John, what that was.
Well, as far as I can remember, he was broadcasting for the BBC. He was a Bulgarian, I think. The Bulgarian Secret Service wanted him taken out, and they potted him with an umbrella gun in London, I think, on a bridge.
That's right. He was walking over the bridge, wasn't he?
He was murdered, and I don't know if he was the first, but he's certainly not being the last.
No.
There seems to be quite a spate of these in more recent times, and you'll hear more of it, I reckon.
All right, so the odds are, John, that it is Putin's people, whether Putin himself approved it or not.
Well, yeah, I think if you go to Paddy Power tonight...
Right. OK, well, there are lots of bookmakers out there. Thank you, John. Interesting. John thinks it probably is the Russian regime. Many others are sceptical. Jay in Bournemouth is a new caller to this show. Good evening, Jay.
Nigel, how are you?
I doubt, even if we have conclusive proof, Jay, that this has been done by a Russian agent who's in the UK, KGB linked or whatever, I doubt our government, Jay, will do a single thing.
And I agree with you. I don't think anything's going to happen. And it beggars belief, because we don't really have a military force or anything that we could do to counter anything that Russia is doing anymore, you know. I remember in 1989, I was just down the road from where you are now. You're in Fort Myers. I was down at Naples, just down the road. And, yeah, and I was at a burger place called Harold's Place. Best burgers in the area. I can thoroughly recommend it. And,
right. I'll remember that later. When the show's over, I'll head down there.
And we were sitting sort of in like an outdoor chicky bar place, you know, having a few beers. And they had these TV sets suspended from the ceiling. And one was showing CNN, and one was showing a sports channel, and all this sort of thing going on. And then all of a sudden, without any warning, bingo, 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 all of the screens turned to a live feed from the Berlin Wall, and people were clambering on the Berlin Wall and trying to, you know, hammer it down, you know. And we were all thinking, all the Americans around me were thinking, oh, they're going to get shot. The East German border guards are going to open fire on them and all this sort of thing. And it suddenly, I suddenly remembered that, you know, when I left school, down in Plymouth in 1965, we had 50,000 people working in the Royal Navy dockyard. 50,000.
Yeah, Devonport.
Yeah, most of the school leavers got apprenticeships in the Royal Navy dockyard, and now there's just a few hundred people working in there, you know, because there's no ships to service, we just don't have a proper navy anymore. We don't have any.
Well, we don't, Jay. We don't, Jay. And in fact, actually, since 2010, the way we've cut all of our services has, in my view, been shameful. Nevertheless, you know, people being murdered on our soil would not necessarily precipitate us going to an act of war, but I do think we'll do nothing. Jay, I thank you for your call. Simon in Peterborough says, this government doesn't have the guts to do anything. Well, unless it's a review. And I think that's probably right. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC, live from Fort Myers in Florida. It's 7:30. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, says that we're going to respond in a robust and appropriate manner once we ascertain who was responsible for the poisoning of a former Russian spy, his daughter, and a police officer who was first on the scene, who is also really quite unwell. I have to say, I doubt we'll do almost anything. Interesting story that's broken today. Guido Fawkes, the news and politics website, can reveal the existence of a draft Keir Starmer press release that shows Labour has been working with Brussels on Brexit policy. The draft press release, which was written after Corbyn's speech last week, would have boasted how Labour had secured EU backing for their customs union proposal. The statement would have said, it is understood that the European Parliament's Brexit steering group was set to adopt its resolution to reflect the wording of Jeremy Corbyn's customs union policy. The press release was never sent, but it subsequently got leaked. And isn't this, folks, what I've been saying on this show all the way through? If you want to look for collusion in global politics, don't look at the Russians and whether they help Trump or Brexit. Just look at the way the Labour Party are, and all the Remainers are working hand in glove with the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels to try to undo the greatest democratic exercise in the history of our nation when 17.4 million people voted Brexit. They're all working together. Piece of Florida news for you. New gun control measures for Florida have passed another legal hurdle weeks after one of the worst school shootings in U.S. history. The state's House of Representatives passed a bill raising the age to buy a gun from 18 to 21 and imposing a 3-day waiting period on all gun sales. So we're beginning to see, you know, in the wake of 17 people being killed at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Remember, it was Nicholas Cruz, the 19-year-old. He'd been expelled from the school. He came back and committed this absolute atrocity. And we are beginning to see some gun controls coming in to Florida and other parts of the USA. That is a change. Back to, if it's proven that it's Putin's gang that have done this, and a lot of you, of course, are very sceptical. They say, well, why on earth would they behave in such a ridiculous manner? Perhaps it's somebody wanting to frame the Russians for this. But if it was proven to be them, what would Amber Rudd and Boris Johnson do? And from what I can see so far, we might not send a few people to the World Cup football. By that I mean one or two diplomats, but all the footballers would still go. I don't think we'll do anything, even if it is proven to have been Putin's people. I wonder what Adrian in Oldham thinks. Adrian, what would you do?
First of all, just let me say I think it is quite obviously a state thing because of the nature of the product used. But there's a very good logic for waiting all these years, isn't there? And a very good logic for the way it was done. Number one, there must be probably quite a lot of these people. He's not the only one. He was an ex-Russian spy living somewhere or living somewhere else. And it's effectively a message to them, two very powerful messages in one. Number one, you can never, ever relax. Sooner or later, whether it's 1 year, 1 month, 8 years, we'll get you. And by the way, we'll get your family too. So that's an extremely powerful message. I would suspect, by the way, Putin doesn't have to tick every box on this. It's probably a general policy, and his people carry it out from time to time. In terms of what we do about it, Johnson, of course, is, as the Russians have called him, a child in an adult's body, and therefore he issues a ludicrous sound.
It's actually, as a put-down line, it's quite good, isn't it?
Very good. Well, I think and the people in the American State Department say they just don't want to meet with him because he's such a clown. But whereas Amber Rudd says, when we find out or if we find out, then we'll do something, a far more wise statement, because it shows something that sounds robust. It actually gives her the opportunity to kick the thing so far down the road in terms of proof that it never has to be done. So as a sort of a sensible political gambit, hers was one. His was his typical, I've got to try to stay in the headlines thing when he's becoming less and less relevant to anybody and anything in the world, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, her words, Adrian, you're right, in terms of political crafting, her words sound very strong, but in effect, she's bought herself a huge amount of time, yeah?
And in fact, enough time for it to be forgotten, yeah? Because, I mean, in terms of proof, and by the way, if you wait, if they'd killed him immediately he'd been swapped, then it would have been very, very obvious and an easy pin to put on, an easy way to pin the blame on them. By waiting 8 years, they introduced a lovely bit of doubt, and for many of your listeners, that doubt is enough to make them say, well, we don't know. Whereas, obviously, I would have thought with the chemical constituent used, the Russians don't hand those out like sweets to anybody any thug that's wandering around the streets. They're very...
UK taxpayers would necessarily be very pleased about. What does Simon in Horchurch think? Good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. As you've alluded to earlier, we've interfered with Russian interests at what they call their near abroad, and obviously they've got very sensitive about that. But as is likely this is proved to be the Russian state that's done this, then they're now doing exactly the same in our country, and any government worth its salt has to react to that. Now, what can we do? In my opinion, if it's proved that this is taking place, then I don't think the England football team can attend the World Cup. It would need to be...
Can you, Simon, just stop you there for a moment. Mm-hmm. Back in 1980, when the Olympics was being held based in Moscow, the government position, Mrs. Thatcher's government position, was that they advised our athletes not to attend, but nearly all of them went, didn't they? Can you actually imagine? But can you actually imagine the uproar, the anger in the UK, in England particularly, if the football team didn't go to the World Cup?
Well, I mean, I'm a football fan, Mr. Farage, and I will be disappointed if we're not taking part. But nonetheless, the difference between 1980 and now is, of course, that was the invasion of Afghanistan. Obviously a problem for the Afghan people, but not directly a threat, an attack on us. This is an attack on our sovereignty. This is an attack on our people. As I think you probably mentioned, it's not only an attack on an emigre now living in our country, it's also an injury to at least one policeman and sort of, hopefully minor injury to other citizens of this country. So we're talking about something entirely different from 1980. The government did just suggest to the athletes they shouldn't go. In this case, if it's proved that we've had an attack on our territory, then that's a question of the government saying, we're withdrawing. we should also agitate. I'm not saying that we've got the political.
So, Simon, let me just pin you down on this, please. Mm-hmm. So, are you absolutely saying that if it's proved a Russian agent did this, with or without Putin's approval, but if it's proved that a Russian state actor did this, are you saying we should withdraw our football team from the World Cup?
Yeah, let me give you a sort of.
All right, no, fine. I mean, look, it's a very strong opinion. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments on that. What else would you like to say, Simon?
Right. Well, I think there are other measures that we can take as well. There are economic sanctions that we can take. We can obviously withdraw our embassy from Moscow. And ultimately, although it sounds a bit cloak and dagger, I know, but as people have alluded to, there are various factions involved in the Russian establishment, just as there are to some degree here. But obviously, in their case, they're much more violent, shall we say, or, prepared to use different means. We should be making it clear to Mr. Putin that if he intends to interfere in our internal affairs, then if it's not him, if it's one of these other factions, then we need him to do something about that. And if it is something led by himself, then we should be making it clear that we will do whatever is necessary for our intelligence services and whatever else to encourage those other factions if they are in any sort of position to undermine his rule in order to promote themselves.
Well,
it's a question of pushing him as to understanding that this is not a one-way street.
Well, Simon, one thing I'm certain of, if you were in the cabinet, you'd take a lot firmer action than I think we're going to get from our current government. Thanks ever so much indeed for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC, live from Fort Myers in Florida, and it's now 7:45. I get on Twitter. Nigel Farage is representing his Russian backers this evening, saying people don't think it was Russia who done the poisoning. Anyone sane thinks otherwise, says Stevie. Stevie, listen, matey, I know there are lots of people on the left of British politics and amongst the Democrats in America who have quite openly said that I've been funded by the Russians, that I'm at the middle of this international conspiracy. But I'm sorry, matey, it's just not true. Be a fantastic story if it was, but it's just not true. David says Putin is an attention seeker. Rattle his cage and he lets you know he's around. I would give Russia a wide berth. The UK hasn't the capability to confront this power. Don't feed the bear, says David. Well, David, I've been arguing don't provoke the bear since 2005, when I heard Cameron and Osborne say that it was their policy as leaders of the Conservative Party to push as hard as they could for the Ukraine to become part of the European Union and NATO, and that is directly what has led to a huge deterioration in relations between Russia and the West, and perhaps we are actually in some form of new Cold War. Toril is calling me from Bromley in Kent, a new caller to the show. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm a bit amazed by this conversation, to be honest. I mean, your last caller went from asking for the England football team to be withdrawn from the World Cup to essentially saying we should send James Bond in to start undermining Putin's regime. At what point have we actually been categorically told that Russia's even involved in this? I mean, as far as I can see, from the information given, we have an expatriate Russian who has been attacked, that's for sure. But we have no information whatsoever, or been given any information to say that the Russian state, or any faction in the Russian state, or anybody in the Russian intelligence services has actually been involved in this. So
there is no proof, Toril. There is no proof at all. Your line is rotten. I'm going to encourage you. I know it's the first time you've ever called us. Do call us again. Your line is rotten. But Toril there from Bromley making the point, there is no proof at all. Maxine is calling from Croydon, another new caller to the show. Good evening, Maxine.
Hello, Mr. Farage. Yeah, first caller to you, my darling.
Hello.
Nice to speak to you. Hello, my lovely.
Lovely to speak to you. So what do you think, Maxine? What do you think?
I think, look, the Russians are going to make a hell of a lot of money out of the World Cup this year. You know that as well as I do. You're a politician, my darling. You're a lovely man. I'll pull out.
Go on.
And I know it ain't the right thing to say, because you're going to have footballer fans out there that are going to say, no, we can't do that. Ain't fair on the footballers because it might be their last World Cup. Well, let us take a stand. Let us pull out, because Russia are relying on making a hell of a lot of money out of the football matches being put on the TV, making a hell of a lot of money. Now, if we lead by example, when they do something over here to us, you watch the rest of them countries pull out as well. When we lead by example, I'll tell you what's going to happen, Mr. Farage. I'll tell you what's going to happen. When our fans go out there is no protection. The Russian hooligan fans are going to create problems. Then it's going to look bad on our fans that go out there just to watch a football match.
But Maxine, I do understand your passion with this. All right, fine. But there isn't any proof yet that it was the Russians that did this.
So what do you think, Mr. Farage? Do you think it was
What do I think? Well, I tell you what I think, Maxine. I think it's very unlikely that this act was not committed by somebody who was a Russian state actor. So, yes, I suspect that it is somebody working for the Russian authorities that did this, as indeed they've done many other bad things on our soil. But, Maxine... But Maxine, so I think you're right, but I don't think we should. I don't think we can. We can't say guilty until we got some proof, can we?
Right. So what if we get the proof? Would you agree with me that as a country we need to stand up for ourselves? We never stand up for ourselves. We follow by what every other country does. Why can't we stand up for ourselves? And
Maxine, no, as a general point, we should be standing up for ourselves, whether it's in the Brexit negotiations or wherever it is. But would I, Maxine, if it was proved that it was a Russian, KGB agent, whatever, that did this, would I support your call? Would I support your call to pull the England team out of the World Cup? I don't think I could do that. To millions and millions of England fans, and in Croydon, Crystal Palace fans, of course. I just don't think I could do that. But Maxine, you make your point very clearly. I thank you very much indeed for the call. Second person that said we should withdraw from the World Cup final. All Boris said is we should pull out a few diplomats. Adrian is calling from Hastings, another new caller. So, Adrian, what's to be done?
Nigel, I think it's a bit of a red herring, actually. I don't care who murdered who. Russia is unaccountable. The United States Security Council is impotent. All the time Russia's got a veto, nothing's going to happen. Russia can do whatever they want. The real answer is to have some governance over this whole thing. The United Nations Security Council should have a situation where two countries need to veto the motion, not just one. Russia is unaccountable. They're quite happy.
Well, that's the way the UN Security Council's been set up, Adrian, as you know.
And it fails.
I don't think since the League of Nations back in 1921 that necessarily this organisation in that incarnation or this has been a tremendous success. But let's assume, suppose we get some evidence in 2 weeks' time that a KGB agent did this. What would you do, Adrian? Or what should Amber Rudd do?
Oh, dead easy. Get hold of the United Nations Security Council. Change the policy where Russia or one country can't veto.
All right, no, fine, I've got it, but that may take 10 years to change.
The sooner the better. If we don't start now, it's never going to get.
All right, fair enough. No, Adrian, fair enough. And Adrian there from Hastings looking for, really big global change in terms of the way the UN Security Council is administered. Kevin is calling from Cardiff. Good evening, Kevin.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening. So, what? I'm all right. Now, what's motivated you? You've never called me before.
I wish I was where you were in America right now, because I feel nervous. I just like to say...
Why do you feel nervous, Kevin?
Well, Russia has been testing our airspace. They're sending submarines into near our waters. Why is he doing that? Right? If you want to needle someone, you don't like someone, you want to needle someone. That's the type of thing you would do. This attack on this chap now, I just think it's. I mean, come on. We've just had nerve agents used on the British streets of the UK, innit?
Yes.
Isn't it
it's pretty awful, I agree.
Yeah. Now, what if I wake up in the morning or tomorrow and the cabinet's been taken out, or Cobra meeting? It's obvious he wants war with us. What I would do, I'd get on. Winston Churchill said after we defeated the Nazis to go and get the Russians, and he said he was a warmonger. I think we've just got to wake up and smell the coffee. He wants war. And we just get out. What I would do, I'd be on.
But Kevin, all the while, we are in a close military alliance with the United States of America, do you really think in those circumstances that Putin would want war with us?
Nigel, didn't I read last week on the news that he warned the West that he has new super weapons? Did you see that? He said,
"Yes, I did see. I did see that. I did see that."
Said, right, just hear me out, Nigel. Right? He said that he had special missiles that could go anywhere. And I thought at the time, what does he mean by that? We've already got cruise missiles. That's nothing new. How do we know he hasn't got little missiles he can send into a barbershop while you're having a haircut? You don't know what technology they've got. This chap.
Or us, Kevin. I mean, Kevin. Kevin.
I mean, I can't believe that the people we're all going about, but we just had nerve agents, a serious weapon used on the UK.
It's Kevin, it's horrible, but I wouldn't be too scared about Russian technology. If you saw those naval vessels, right, those naval vessels that came down the channel a few months ago, they were mostly aging rust buckets. So in terms of technology, they're not with it. Kevin, I thank you for your call. And Kelly says, "Hi, Nigel. Many of your callers are missing an important point. This is not a scandal in Russia. There are state denials. But the killing of someone viewed as a traitor plays well for Putin before their elections, as does a diplomatic row with the UK." So, Kelly, I think, what you're saying there is a very, very fair point. I think it's 75–80% likely that a Russian state actor has done this. In response, I frankly can't see that we can do very much. I'm guessing maybe the voices saying we shouldn't attend the World Cup football will get greater. But just imagine if we pulled the England football team out of the World Cup, the anger of millions in this country. So my conclusion is little will happen. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'll be back on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much.